In today's episode, a professional surfer and Hollywood star is taken off his surfboard and eaten by a shark. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying shark attack on Tamayo Perry. Welcome to Final Affliction. You might not know the name Tamayo Perry, but you've almost certainly seen his face. The 49-year-old Hawaiian native has been featured in huge blockbusters like Pirates of the Caribbean, Blue Crush, and Hawaii Five-0. But acting was mostly a side gig for Tamayo. If he weren't so passionate about surfing and protecting lives in the ocean, he probably would have carved himself out a nice star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame eventually. But Tamayo's heart was set in the sea. He was a Hawaiian boy through and through. And actually, he made a name for himself long before the movies as a pretty formidable surfer. He didn't just win some small-time competitions. Oh no. Tamayo went up against the biggest names in the industry. In '99, he won the Pipeline Masters. He finished 5th in the Billabong Pros, and his unique tube-riding style influenced later mega-athletes like Jerry Lopez and Tom Carroll. And until the 23rd of June 2024, he was considered as one of the best and most decorated surfers in the entire world. But for all his accolades on the board and the big films he starred in, back home on the islands, Tamayo was just a regular dude with a wife and a permanent post as a lifeguard. He'd met Emilia on the set of the movie Blue Crush, starring Kate Bosworth. Emilia was a professional bodyboarder, and she'd moved to Hawaii to pursue a career in surfing too. Predictably, the two water babies fell head over heels for each other, and for 22 years, Emilia describes their marriage as a 22-year vacation, always exciting and joyful. Between his busy schedule, the two carved out enough time to host surfing classes for kids, and Tamayo's work as a lifeguard involved more than just getting people in trouble out of the water. He was deeply involved in training new recruits and educating the public on safety procedures on the beaches and in the water. Conserving life in the ocean, respecting the ocean that gave him so much joy, and cleaning up pollution were always at the forefront of any of his campaigns. Brands like Nissan and Coca-Cola were so enamored by his natural charm and passion that they funded some of his efforts to keep beaches safe and clean. Yet, for all the seriousness behind his efforts, Tamayo was a light-hearted, free-spirited man that thrived on making others laugh. There wasn't a run-in with a handsome surfer that wasn't punctuated with a toothy grin and a joke. On Sunday morning, Tamayo was on duty. He'd gone out bright and early to scan the beaches for swimmers and boarders in distress. But the morning was a quiet one. Even though it wasn't exactly peak tourist season, you can almost always expect the island of Mokuaia, also known as Goat Island, to have at least a couple surfers at any given time. It's not the most traveled island, but it's got great waves, and it's one of the islands where water sports enthusiasts and quite a few professional athletes prefer to ride waves because it's just a little quieter there. There hadn't been any significant shark sightings in Hawaii for months, and Tamayo, as if he tapped into a sixth sense, made an ominous post on social media just days before his death. He said that he could smell sharks in the water, almost like the seas were making themselves known to him on some deeper level than we can usually perceive. When noon came around, Tamayo was relieved of his post for a break, and since he had 2 hours to kill, he decided to ride a few waves on the very waters that he'd been watching all morning. The sun was high, the waves were good, and there was no reason to let all of those tubes go to waste for 2 whole hours. The only other people sharing that patch of surf was a pair of jet skiers who were keeping themselves behind the waves so that the 2 bodyboarders and 3 surfers could ride the waves at their highest point without fear of crashing into them. It gave the 2 gentlemen on the machines a good view of the water all the way to the sands, which ultimately was the only reason that Tamayo was even discovered at all, or his body would never have been returned to his family. They saw Tamayo enter the water and even took a few minutes to watch him disappear behind the first big swell. The 2 were Hawaiian natives too, and they knew of Tamayo and his long career as a surfer. They decided to give him a few minutes more to warm up. so that they could double around and get a good view of his amazing tube riding skills from the front side of the waves. No one who knew of Tamayo would have missed an opportunity to see him in action. One of the men even saw him take a second wave and then a third. The two were about to take one last turn in the deep before heading to the front to watch the rest of Tamayo's set when the second man caught sight of something disturbing. In the third wave that Tamayo disappeared behind, the water turned a shocking shade of red. The change was instant. 1 second the deep blue Hawaiian water was just as it should be, and the next there was a spreading pool of red and a pale figure floating on the water. Just as the man pointed the scene out to his friend, they saw Tamayo's floating body yank down and disappear beneath the surface for a second, bob back up again, and the water turned even darker. The reality was starkly clear. Not only had Tamayo been attacked right inside the wave he'd been riding, the shark was still eating him. Without another word, the two gunned down on the floating surfer at full speed. Their roaring engines punctuated the air outside, and it reverberated inside the waves too, undoubtedly causing the animal to flee from the approaching engines. They saw the ghost of a shadow swimming away just beneath the surface, but it dove deeper, and they lost sight of it just 8 feet away from Tamayo. It was just too quick. They couldn't discern the species or even the size from where they were riding in from. Still in high gear, they arrived at Tamayo's side, grabbed him below the armpits and dragged him onto one of the jet skis. As they rode with him to the beach, they left a trail of red behind them. The blood was swallowed up by the ocean even as they dragged him out to the sand, and the deep blue of the Hawaiian surf returned to its former crystal clear, as if there hadn't just been a deadly attack in it at all. Already, Tamayo wasn't breathing, and the wounds on his body proved that he'd bled out somewhere between the scene and the sand. Even as quick as the response was, the damage to Tamayo's body was just too extreme for him to survive. The initial bite, it seems, happened as he was riding the wave, almost severing his left leg right above the knee. It was undoubtedly where most of the blood loss came from. The femoral artery was in tatters. Even if emergency services got him right inside the water, they wouldn't have been able to pinch the vein. There was just nothing left of it to even find in the wreckage that was his thigh. Then the predator turned back and took a chunk out of his waist. That's what the jet skiers saw when Tamayo disappeared for a second or two before bobbing back to the surface. While they waited for an ambulance to arrive, the men and the other wave riders who'd evacuated the water the moment they realized that there was a predator amongst them tried with their towels and whatever they had on them to tie the leg and to keep the rest of Tamayo's organs inside his waist cavity. It wasn't just that they were spilling out of his body. The organs were punctured, leaking their fluids out alongside the mass amounts of blood. Emergency services arrived in minutes, fast even for Hawaii's famous quick response times. But Tamayo Perry, one of the greatest surfers the world has ever known, was long dead, and athletes across the globe are left with a gaping hole in their hearts. The response from the world of extreme sports has been overwhelming, to say the least. Not surprising, since almost every surfer and bodyboarder of note has had the opportunity to meet and interact with the charming character that Tamayo was when he was alive. Not a soul who met him walked away from him without being touched deeply by his presence. For now, the whole of Hawaii is in mourning too. The islands are as quiet as the danger flags on the sands rustling in the tropical breeze. Only the tourists are out and about, but the locals have decided to retreat from their beloved ocean for the next week while the funeral takes place. Because burying Tamayo wasn't as cut and dried as funerals usually are, with his fellow sportsmen flying in from all over the world, and most Hawaiians also in attendance, it's been decided to wait a week until everyone arrives, and the rather complicated arrangements can be made to accommodate the scores of people who will come out to bid their hero a proper send-off. One thing's certain, Tamayo is a legend, and legends are remembered forever after their final affliction.